Bless the Lord. Welcome, everybody. Jesus is King. This is Cosmic Corner. Welcome back to another episode only on Faith Unaltered with my co-host Jaylen here. We have with us today, I'm super excited because it's been a minute since Courtney's been on, but it's been a real minute since Spencer's been on here.
Yep.
And I am just exceedingly blessed. And maybe we'll see the whiteboard come out. Maybe.
Nope, I left it at work. Sorry.
Oh, you know what? That's okay. I'm white enough for everyone. That's all right. Welcome, everybody, to a really cool episode that was a special request by one of our regular Cosmic Corner listeners and fans, Deborah. Thank you so much for the question that inspired this episode, as we're going to talk about death and the fear of death, our experience of things like grief, and the reason, the exceedingly good reason why we no longer need to be run and maintained by our fear of death, why that no longer needs to be the kind of mediating decision-making mechanism that it seems to have been for so many people for so long, and even in our own individual lives. We no longer have to forget the future and fear and sin right now. And it's beautiful. Welcome, Jaylen. How you doing, bud? How was your week?
Good, man. Well, that's not true. I'm doing good. My week was not good. But I'm all right. Working through just family issues. Things happen, and we work through them, and we keep going.
It does seem that things is a pretty common thing to happen. Yeah.
Yeah.
That is for sure. And they won't stop.
They won't stop. All the things. Oh man.
Man.
Courtney, welcome. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. I've been podcasting all week, it feels like. We started with an episode of me and Spencer on Amber's channel this week, talking about Leviticus and sacrifice and Day of Atonement, those good things. Then we had a fun couple of episodes here on Faith Unaltered of Hebrew Bible Breakdown with Nathan Jacobs. Personal fan, I'm such a fan of Nathan Jacobs, if any of you guys know. So super fun to be able to talk to him. And that was
we couldn't tell that you'd ever even thought about him before when you were talking to him. He seemed like a stranger.
I know.
That was a great conversation, by the way.
Thanks.
Heck yes.
Before the episode, he'd asked me, we were talking about something, and he's like, well, have you read this paper that I've written? And I was like, yeah, I've read that paper. Then he was like, well, and I also wrote this other paper. I was like, I'm just going to go ahead and stop you there. I've read every paper that is on your academia.edu profile page. And he was like, okay. I promise I'm not a stalker.
Yeah, that was a great conversation. You guys did awesome. You and Amber are a great team with the Hebrew Bible breakdown stuff. It's freaking awesome what you guys are doing, and the tools that you guys are able to provide with the logos, software, and all that stuff, and just providing some how-tos on how to handle that stuff. Because sometimes, I think he brought it up. He talked about going to Home Depot. It's like sure, I can buy a tool and have it. That doesn't mean I know how to use it. And I definitely thought about that, how I've been to Home Depot and gotten into it. I'm like, yeah, this looks like it'll do, and I totally misuse it. And I'm causing way more damage than I had initially. So
yep,
it was a great conversation.
Router. I'm
sorry, Spencer. What was that?
Yeah, I have definitely done that with a router for sure. Sure. I'll use a router sometime, and then
yeah. Just sits there, collects dust. Yeah.
There, man.
Yep. And when I try to bring it out, exactly what you said, it makes it much worse.
Sure.
Yeah. As a handyman and a maintenance guy and overall rather equipped poor person, I can tell you and can confirm you can buy a tool and it has no guarantee when you get home that it's going to operate the way that you intended in your head. You should probably read the instructions or find somebody who does know. It is wisdom. This is wisdom.
It's almost like discipleship has multiple implications to it, multiple applications that you can actually exercise the wisdom in.
Yeah, it seems like it would be something really nifty to have a system where somebody was the teacher and the other person was the learner for just everything,
But anyway.
So today, what we're going to discuss in a very generic sort of sense is the thing that every person has to come to terms with.
Mm-hmm.
And there's not a person alive that doesn't have to come to terms with this, because the statistics are in. 10 out of 10 folks die. It's not looking good.
Death and taxes.
Death and taxes, the only certainties. That's right. Take that, Calvinism. Anyway, what we have ultimately is something that if we refuse to look it in the face, it will grow. And I say that almost as kind of like if you can remember any nightmare that you've had in which you were being chased by something. And I've had this experience lots of times, being chased by something in a dream. The longer you refuse to look at the thing chasing you, the more terrifying it's allowed to become, and the smaller you feel. Every time I've had this experience, it freaks me out. I wake up and I feel like I'm 2 inches tall, and the thing chasing me is an Empire State Building with fangs. You know what I mean? Like, but as soon as you look at it, it's a different thing. And so this is one of the powers of revelation. Just look at the thing, and you actually get a guesstimation about the actual size of the issue. Just looking at something reasonably, I think, has a lot of utility, even if it's something you don't know what to do with yet. Just seeing the thing, I think, is enough to help out with some of the underlying fear and anxiety that comes with things that we find to be, our biggest uncertainties. But if you were to find like the face of uncertainty and fear, it would pretty much be dying, right? Death itself. And sometimes for us, it's not necessarily the process of dying. It's more so how it ends up happening a lot of the time that makes us fearful in the more immediate sense. But in the, let's say, in the grander sense of our own like ongoing experience of being living things, that looming thing, it really is huge and looming, and it's very difficult to ignore. And it's not something that you're necessarily thinking about all the time unless you're being morbid, but it is certainly not gone just because it's not in the foreground of your mind. And so that's why I think it's so crucial and important to deal with this, and why I wanted it to have its own episode instead of just being an answer at the end of a previous episode, is that this is one of those things that I think deserves our time and attention, just so that we can understand better, be better equipped. And it has far-reaching implications to be able to look this thing in the face and see it for what it is, and then also to know that it no longer is that looming thing, that something has changed everything, right? And so if we do the cosmic corner zoom out exercise and say, what is it? Death is, let's say, the removal or lapse of whatever it is that holds the world together, right? Whether that's for you, an individual, right? It could be the thing that keeps your body animated, what we call a soul or a spirit, whatever that thing is. It's the thing that makes you what you are in that sort of integral personal sense, right? And we can experience this on lots of levels, but on the biological level, it would be, let's say, the body without the spirit, right? It's a dead thing. James talks about this. He likens it unto faith without action is also like a corpse, like a dead body, right? Sure. What happens to a dead body if you leave it there and it has no soul to enter it? What happens to the dead body? Well, it simply just dissolves and fragments into oblivion, right? Yeah. That's what death is. That's what death does. It is the removal of the thing that brings everything together, and it is the dissolution or fragmentation of everything into nothing. That's what death, ultimately, I think, in that fully zoomed out sense, to me, that's what that is. Is there anything that you guys wanted to add to that zoomed out kind of view that would help to? Sorry, there's a motorcycle going by my house again. Is there anything that you guys want to add to that zoomed out view that would kind of texture the conversation a little bit more? I feel like I'm being vague on purpose, but I don't see everything. So
I would love to hear what Courtney has to say about this, because I know she's about to provide some Hebrew understanding of what death is.
Well, I was gonna go there, but I was like, I could see Spencer's wheels turning, so I feel like he might still be more general than I would before I like get into the nitty gritty.
Okay.
You're also courteous.
I know.
Well, that actually was part of where I was going to head to, actually, because one of the things that it seems, as I'm reading the Hebrew Bible, I'm looking at what death is. And yes, on a functional level, it's just that, separation of soul and body, or, nefesh and basar. But on a much more theological level, it's slavery. It's being swallowed up by that kind of primeval serpent or dragon, or however you want to translate that, nachash. Yeah. So when we look at Sheol and Hades, which is the realm of death in the Hebrew Bible, that's seen as, first of all, a universal condition that everybody who is a part of, Adam's race becomes subject to. And then it also is seen as this thing that is very much like a prison, like it's described like a prison. And so I think when I think about death in the context of at least the Old Testament, that's one of the things that is foremost in my mind.
Yeah, I think that's a really great place to, bring it to, because it's, as you look through the Old Testament, there's lots of ways that like death gets pictured. That's not just like physical death, but of things that prefigure that. And exile is one of them. And so the exile from the garden prefigures death because they no longer have access to the source of life, to participate in the source of life, which is God's own immortality, which is granted through the tree of life. And so then you have these moments where they're kind of offered that access back. So there's multiple places where they're offered that access back. But we see that in the very beginning, we're meant to be these inspirited bodies, basically inspirited bodies. If we're like getting a little bit more like not as big picture as what you were offering, Davidson, but where we're given God's breath, like God creates a human out of the dust of the earth, and he breathes into this dust, which is kind of interesting to imagine, like a body coming out of this dust. And then that's when the human becomes a living being. And so if at any point after that, the spirit and the body become separated, in order for God to be the God of life, resurrection kind of is necessary and on the table, even if there's not an explicit doctrine of resurrection, because God is the God of life. He's the God of the living. As Jesus says, like whenever he's asked about the doctrine of resurrection by the Sadducees, like God says, I am the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. He's the God of the living and not the dead, right? So there are these moments, and we see the Torah kind of punctuated by these moments of offering life and death back to the people. You can come back into life and follow God and follow his ways, and that is the way to life. Or you can continue to go your own way, which is the way out into the wilderness, the desert, and out into the desert is death. And so you see that with Joseph. You kind of like, you get all these figures after Genesis 3 where you're like, is this the human that is going to bring back life into the death space and, be the seed of Eve that brings life back to all mankind? And so you get these humans throughout the story that you're paying attention to. And then Joseph comes at the end of Genesis. And the end of Genesis is punctuated by that phrase, like, what you intended for evil, God intended for good. You intended my death, but God intended your life, like to save your lives through me going into Egypt. And so you're like, okay, and then how does Genesis end? He says, I am dying.
Yeah.
And bring up my bones up out of this place. Whenever God surely visits you, visitingly visits you. It's like said twice. He'll visit you and make sure you take up my bones up out of this place. And so Joseph's like, I'm not going to be the one that saves us from this death problem, even though he has the wisdom to discern life from death. So even in that very limited sense, wisdom itself becomes immortality. Like if you're granted God's wisdom, if you pursue God's wisdom, then you have access to life in the midst of the death space.
You know, something you see that in Proverbs too, Courtney. I believe it's chapter 3, 2 or 3, where wisdom is almost like a person, and it's a person that's calling out to people to come in, embody me, participate, join me, and I will give you life, right? But to be separate from me is death, right? And it doesn't exactly say it that way, but it's implied, right? That death is also like a separation from life, right? Or life-giving source, which would be God. And God in this case, it's death could also be to be separate from God while still being alive, which is it's kind of weird to think about it that way, but one can still be alive and dead all at the same time.
Yeah, actually, like the concept of, I'm going to just always like highlight this book because this book really changed my view of life and death. Resurrection and the Restoration of Israel, The Ultimate Victory of the God of Life by John Levinson. And he walks through kind of the Hebrew Bible concept of those terms, life and death. And he shows that in the mind of the Hebrew Bible, the difference between life and death is not breathing and non-breathing, like we tend to think of it. The difference between life and death is your kind of proximity to the flourishing of God, essentially.
To the tree of life.
Yeah, to the tree of life, exactly. And so you can be someone who is like the Walking Dead, like who's zombified. That even though you're breathing, you are walking death.
Sure.
Sounds a bit like Paul, but you were dead in your sin, in your trespasses and sins. And of course, there he's speaking to primarily a Gentile audience, and he's talking specifically about their, again, to go back to the slavery motif, their enslavement to, I believe he calls it the elemental principles of the world in that passage. And so the idea there being that, like, essentially you're going to be serving somebody. You're going to be serving an Elohim of some sort, either the Elohim or a bunch of other ones. And one brings life and the rest bring death, which also sounds an awful lot like Paul in Romans 6:23. But so.
Yeah, and consequently, just to go, we haven't gotten there yet, but this will set us up for some part of this conversation in the future. I don't know where we're going, but just like you can have death on the breathing side of the equation, you can also have life on the non-breathing side of the equation in the mindset of the Hebrew Bible. So so just like we were talking about with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, where he says, I am the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and I'm the God of the living and not the dead. So that they are separate, you know, their spirit is separated from their bodies, but they are on the alive side of the equation somehow because they are attached to God's immortal life.
Yeah, that's
the way that they live their life.
That's interesting to consider, because it's almost like if you wanted to provide nuance there, God could have said, I was the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, right? Which would imply that they're dead and have gone on. But to say that I am the God of Abraham, it implies that I was when they were physically here. I still am, though they're not physically here anymore. I'm still their God. It was like, okay, well, if they're not physically here, where are they? And so that's interesting to consider.
Well, and especially because in Hebrew, most of the time that you see like the verb to be translated in Hebrew, like, you know, I am the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, whether it's past tense, present tense, future tense, doesn't matter. It's a supplied verb because it's just kind of an assumed verb, but there is a verb to be. And so whenever it's trying to be super explicit, then you will actually see it there. Like the earth was formless and void. Then you'll get like the, you know, something that indicates the past tense for the earth was formless and void in Genesis chapter 1. But usually it's not there. So if they're being really intentional about like was or am, like present tense, they'll use the actual verb to be. Like it won't just be implied. So they are being very intentional there, Jaylen. Yeah.
What I like also is the provision of like this complementary symbolism that you guys are drawing on, is that because we're composite beings, being imagers, we're made of both the earth and the heavens, that there would be accordingly these symbols of life and death for both pieces of what man is that your body has life and death, but also relationally, ideationally, spiritually, you have life and death as well. And this is demarcated by, like you guys said, connectivity, communion, or exile, right? So what you actually have is, and this is interesting because I feel like something that I've never really seen before is that life in the spiritual sense has to come from outside, and life in the biological sense has to come from the inside, and that God exhalate. He exiles his own spirit into us so that we can partake in him. He's ascending out, right? There's a sending out of the, and this is something that he also did with the apostles from the church out to the people. And so seeing that, I had never seen that pattern until you guys were discussing that. So I wanted to bring that out as well. But that there is this above life and death, below life and death. And then again, the combination of the two in our aspect of how it is that Christ deals with us to bring us into the fold, so to speak, and then our relationship to the fold as part of our relationship to God. That there isn't actually a separation between those two things anymore because of what God has done in the church, in the sacraments, in our relationship, in our worship, in those kind of things, in our almsgiving, in our care, in our charity toward other people, in our receiving of other people's charity and being blessed as much as being a blessing. All of those things are part of one and the same thing now, even though we can see them demarcated individually, that your bios has life and death, but so does your zoe, right? Like your person that connects with God or disconnects with God, which is really the premise, right? And I think rightfully, as much as we fear the cessation of ourselves from our body, because we don't have the immediacy of sight and experience toward it, we often don't recognize in ourselves the fear of being disconnected from the source of life as such, when Christ says that he is the life, right? That he is the way, the truth, and the life. Way meaning there isn't another. Truth meaning there isn't another. Life meaning there isn't. This is all exclusivity. He's claiming to be that source, right? And so, like, recognizing that all of those things again find their unity in the God incarnate is really very amazing, because that's where we started just a moment ago, was with God, you know. And it's funny because when you described that, Courtney, you said God breathed his breath of life into the dust, and in my head what I saw was a tornado in the shape of a human. Just
that's what I was kind of picturing myself.
That's
it's
fantastic.
It's not into clay, like some of the other ancient Near Eastern stories, like they're being crafted out of clay, like where there's water already mixed with the dirt, but it's like the word dust there. So out of the dust he breathes into the dust, and somehow this
and we know that God does that 2 times, where he breathes into the dust, right? He got it in Genesis, then he does it again with Christ, does it again with the apostles, right? Where he breathes into the dust again and makes man a living being again.
He like breathes on them in John's gospel, like he's like, now you've received the Spirit, now you've received this breath again.
Almost like recreating Adam clearly not in a crumple it all up, throw it in the trash can, and then start over sense, but in a renewed, resurrected sense.
And I think you definitely see that because of the issuance of the commandment that he gave to Adam and Eve in the garden. Gets reissued in Matthew 28, right? Be fruitful, multiply, fill the earth, subdue it. That's what he told the apostles to do.
All authority in heaven and earth has been given to me. Now go.
Yep. And fill the earth. Be fruitful.
Yep.
Multiply. Obviously,
well,
it looks a little different. Looks a little different than the way Adam and Eve did it, but still, the principle and the objective is still the same.
Looks a little different. Looks a little different.
Yeah, well, and that connection back to the garden is why I think it's so good that you brought up the exile point, Courtney. Just because there is so much overlap between death and exile in the Hebrew Bible, particularly. So, like, I'm thinking of a couple of different examples off the top of my head. I know that, like, for one in Leviticus, which is objectively the best book of the Hebrew Bible, Sorry, not sorry, Amber. Anyway,
I need to say Psalms, but I agree. It's a good one.
But in any case, one of the things you'll see that you'll see described there very often is something that we might call like the death penalty for breaking various commandments. And the Hebrew word there is kata. And so what that means is like to be cut off. And when you trace the application and the usage of that word, it's okay, Amber, I forgive you anyway. When you trace the application and the usage of that word, it equally gets used for people being sent away from the community, being cut off from the community, being sent out into the wilderness, being sent off into the surrounding cities ruled by the gods of the nations, all those kind of things, and also the actual biological death penalty. So it's like a relational death or a biological death. There's a lot of conflation and overlap between those in the context of exile and being cut off. And so I really think it's important to look at that that moment in the garden as being a time where Adam and Eve were cut off from that tree of life, from that access to the source of life, and not to see that as like a punishment of, okay, you broke a commandment, you now must die, but actually as a mercy. And that's something that and here I'll throw a bone to Amber. That's something that Amber brought up in the chat, and that I'm really glad she mentioned as well, in that many of the church fathers read those passages at the end of Genesis 3 and said that God gave them death as a way to keep them from getting worse, from being crystallized in their sin. So that exile, that death, was a way for them to not be stuck where they are. It was a way to like limit the sin just by having a sheer, finite amount of days. It was a way to unmake the composite creature that is body and spirit by separating them, and hopefully by doing that, perhaps to the destruction of the flesh for the salvation of the soul, perhaps. And it was also a mercy because it was a way to almost like remind the human that he wasn't God, because that certainly was what he thought he was trying to do in the garden. So
reminder that we are the emissary and not the master. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, that's fantastic. We do actually we have two questions here. One of them has some immediacy, and then the other one is a little bit bigger, for sure. So one of the things that I had mentioned was that somebody can be in separation from spiritual life because they have distanced themselves from the Father and from the Christ. And I had said that we're not always aware that that's what's taking place, especially in our own lives. A lot of the time when we're out and we're doing the debaucherous nonsense, we're not actively thinking about it as debaucherous nonsense, right? Sometimes we're plagued with guilt about things like that, but those who are not in Christ and don't have the guidance of the Spirit often are rather numb to this. And so Deborah asked, do you not believe that anybody can have that feeling of being separated from Christ and being dead in the Spirit? And what I would say to that is, when they feel it, they don't recognize its face. I don't say that people don't feel their spiritual death, because that would be silly. I know lots of people that feel spiritual death, and it makes them desperate and alone and afraid. That's actually the premise of what we were talking about with death. We can feel that, and it makes us alone. It makes us afraid. It makes us feel tiny. It is the thing in the dream chasing you that you're refusing to look at. That's what it is. And so many people do feel that. They live in that place consistently and constantly, and they're in a constant search for something that's going to alleviate that, like a salve to a rash, like they're looking for that thing to comfort.
Well, Josh, I would even say that they're actually looking for something to make them feel alive.
Yeah, exactly. Yes, exactly. Because the feeling of death cowering over you makes you pursue something that gives you the feeling of life, and even if it's an artificial and
Yeah.
temporary feeling.
Yeah.
Even if it's a
And-
sugar rush.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Even if
spiritual
it's
sugar
deeply
rush.
harmful. Even if it's deeply
Mhm.
harmful.
Yeah.
Is it okay if I bring in something from my counseling practice? And this comes with a bit of a content
Absolutely.
warning,
Go for it.
Okay.
because it's describing the experience of suicide and self-harm. So
Fair.
one of the things I know, like for instance, when I worked as a school counselor, and I would work with a lot of the middle school kids who were harming themselves, cutting and doing various other things like that. There was a lot of fear from the parents of thinking like, oh my gosh, they want to die, like this is a suicidal gesture or something like that. But and there are times where that is true, but much, much more often, what I've found is that actually, when people are self-harming, it's their way to avoid dying. It's their what they usually would tell me is like, I just feel so numb that life feels pointless. I feel like I'm not excited by the things I used to be excited by. I feel really deep depression because I think I'm worthless, all those kind of things. And hurting themselves was the only way that they could like feel alive. It was actually their just grasping in the dark at trying to find some way to actually be and feel alive. So it's actually the opposite of suicidal intention. It's actually them wanting to be alive and just not knowing how. And so I found that really, really salient when you guys were talking about um, people who are dead and who feel it, or people who are dead in the spirit, so to speak, and feel it. That they even sometimes like the things that we try to like make ourselves feel alive can cause us serious, serious harm.
Mhm.
And it very often, a lot of the people I worked with would describe it almost like an addiction. Um, because it was the only thing that worked. It was the only thing that broke through the super thick fog that they felt in their soul, or at least the only thing they were aware of that worked. And so it's really sobering when you think of just the lengths to which people will go to still feel alive, to escape a feeling of living death.
And I think it's two very appropriate intuitions that live underneath the surface of all that pain. Number one is that sacrificing the bios for the Zoe is entirely ordinate, and we know that.
Mhm.
So when we feel that we're spiritually dead, but we don't know how to articulate that, and we have no idea how to chase it. We have no clue how to chase it, especially if our heart is hardened and we're covered in spiritual scars everywhere. Something has to penetrate through that to grab at you. And that's what the evangelist is really supposed to be there for, is those moments. That's what the heart of a person who's been trained by God in the secret place is going to have, something to equip them to be there in and for the person that's going through those things. Those people aren't meant to be doing that alone or exclusively with a therapist or a stranger on the train. We should be able to help to fill that gap. I believe that wholeheartedly. So number one is that our spiritual intuition, even if we are spiritually dead, is that this is not nearly as important as this. And if this is not alive, this is bupkis. We already know that. The
Yeah.
nihilists found this. You know what I mean? Cosmic Septic here says when he was an agnostic, he knows what that felt like.
Yeah.
To desire to die because nothing was alive. You know that you're dead while you're alive, and that's a terrifying thing. That's part of the fear of death also. It's not merely that you're afraid to die, it's that you're afraid you're dead already. That's terrifying.
It
Right.
is.
And the second thing that Spencer just brought up, and it's something that I've talked about before because I've had this intuition personally, because I used to be a cutter, that
Mhm.
during that time progression, during that place, mentally, physically, spiritually, I was not trying to be dead. I was trying to not be dead. That's absolutely true. The crazy thing that comes out of that is the cue, the experience is all attached, not to the pain necessarily, not for me anyway, was never attached to the pain of the experience. It was attached to the sight of blood. Why is that blood facilitates life? Why did I know that? Why did I not know properly? I was raised in the church, y'all, so this is not a deficit. I was raised in the church with my parents. They would tell me these things, the blood of Jesus. I did not intuit until much later that my desire for blood in the moments of shame and death was not because of my own blood. And that's why it was not sufficient to cleanse my conscience, so to speak. Though the sight of blood was therapeutic in its natural essence, for some reason, my spirit knew that, but my conscious intent, my understanding was not at all in what I was doing to understand that it was the wrong blood.
Yeah. Yep. Because blood is a symbol of life, not death, as Leviticus 17, 11, and 14 tell us.
Which is why it can be a spiritual cleansing agent, yes?
Yes, indeed.
Interesting.
Indeed.
Trust me, you don't want me to go off on that rabbit trail. I've already done that once this week with Courtney. So
many rabbits there. Many rabbits.
There are lots of rabbits.
So the
I was gonna just overlapping that onto some of those wandering experiences we see in the Hebrew Bible is like, I think that kind of gets at that like they know that, I mean, they're warned that only death lies outside of the promised land, for instance, and if you continue to rebel against God, all of these death related things are going to happen. The land is not going to bear fruit for you, right? So you're going to have famine, and then you're going to eventually be sent out of the land, which being sent out of the land in that case meant being sent out back into a desert.
Yeah, those are all garden references.
They're all garden references, and it's all like choose life or choose death, choose blessing, choose curse, and curse is paired with death, and life is paired with God's blessing. But it's almost like they've got to keep on testing it to see, like especially in Judges, they just keep on like having this sin cycle come back around, and so kind of like what Davidson was saying about testing the life to see if it's still worth living, almost see if it's really as good as God says it is, see if it's really as dependent upon God as he says it is in our relationship to God.
And what's interesting with that is that, especially in Judges, is that the testing of life gets worse and worse. It's like the more they go, the testing, the verification of life gets just more and more depraved the more they go,
and more deathly.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, and that's one of the things that's really important to keep in mind when we talk about death, especially in the Hebrew Bible, is that it's not just like this thing that happens to you at some point off in the future. Yes, it is about Sheol and Hades, and as we get into the New Testament, the eschatological realities of Gehenna and those kind of things. It is that. But there's an experience of death even in this life. And a lot of that is bound up in the word corruption, which we tend to think of as a moral thing, which, yes, it has that shade, but very often it was just meant as like decay, like entropy, like falling apart. Again, to go with that, humans are composite beings, a body held together by an animated soul or a spirit. And the more that we are spiritually dead, the more that we are disconnected from the source of life and eating from a different tree than the tree of life, that union gets more and more dissolved, like less and less firm. And that is definitely something that happens even in this life. And so, for example, like we see that in just really stark contrast when we see people who are like addicts, for example, like a meth addict. Like you see them and you see like their body is falling apart. Their being is not held together in the same sort of way. Now it's not always
almost zombie like in a way.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
It's not always super obvious like that, but I mean, like if a person abuses alcohol, like there are effects on the body of that you can see. If a person is living a life of some really intense and gross like promiscuity and stuff like those have effects on the body. And so all of those things are causing corruption, causing it to fall apart. And so that's another aspect of death that I think we should probably keep in mind, is that it's that disillusion of unity.
Yeah, that was what I was trying to start with too, is to really see that death is that, like, on a physical level as well as on the spiritual level, as well as on a community level, even on a national level, even on a massive humanity across time level, right? Like, even in the level of your ideation rather than just your body, at an individual level, that you can have a thought life that's so fragmented it goes nowhere, and that's torturous. It really is. Like, it would be like being in a hellish kind of landscape in your own mind, where you try to make things work, you try to make things make sense, but they don't. And then you have this awareness that because you're not alive, but you don't know what that means, that nothing ever really mattered anyway, and you're left with that Ecclesiastes chapter 1 with no context.
Yep.
That feeling. We all know that feeling. You read that first chapter not knowing where it was going, and you go, what in the heck?
Yeah.
The first time you read that, it's troublesome. It's terrifying.
It is.
It's confrontational, like it's really something else, because the Bible doesn't pull any punches.
And what's interesting is it's the same guy that wrote the life-giving wisdom of Proverbs, right? And then he turns around in Ecclesiastes, like, so you really think that if you apply that wisdom, that's going to equal to a good godly life, then it's going to reap eternal benefits, blah, blah, blah. Hogwash. And it's like, whoa. Like you said, where is he going with this? And if you're, like you said, with no context reading that or really embodying those type of thoughts, it leads you essentially to it leads you to thinking, why not join the bios with the Zoe and just end it all, right? That's eventually where you end up going.
Yeah, Ecclesiastes is just really interesting. Like, I'm going to be Hebrew nerdy always, so just like
please do, please.
Let me go there for a bit, because people have probably heard like the word hevel is the word that's like vanity, and gets repeated all the time. But hevel is actually like Abel's name in Hebrew. So the first death in the Hebrew Bible, that's his name, Abel. And it's because even though he's righteous, he appears and vanishes off the scene almost as quickly as he is mentioned. And what happens whenever he dies, the Lord comes and confronts Cain, and he says, the blood of your brother is crying out from the ground. So even though he is dead, he's able to do something from the other side of death, which is cry out to God. And you see this throughout the Psalms, is that the people who, even though they're dead, if they're connected to God, they're able to pray to God, cry out to God, ask for their vindication, for justice to be executed on their behalf, all these kinds of things. So even if they've crossed over the breathing to non-breathing line, they're able to do certain things, and God hears them. But then when Ecclesiastes starts out, he's like, hevel, because he's essentially saying, like, my life feels like Abel's life. Like, it was like worthless and quick and over before I could mention it. And it's one of those weird moments where the verb to be is actually used in Ecclesiastes 1:12, where he says, I, the preacher, was king over Jerusalem. And so he evokes that past tense there. And there's only one way to become a former king of an ancient tribal culture, and that's to die. And so obviously Solomon would have had to have written this while alive, but he's obviously writing it from a place where he's contemplating his death as if he had died. And this is his cry from the grave, just like Abel's cry from the grave was to ask for justice. His cry from the grave is to say, all of those things that I chased, the women, the buildings, the like big things, those were nothing compared to what we're talking about, which is being attached to God. And so, but as we continue to like live in this culture where there's this like death of meaning, there will be this increase in meaningless deaths, or deaths of meaning, where people just pursue this death in the life space through drugs or just through despair. Death of despair is, I think, the term that they call it. And so we're going to continue to see, I think, a rise in that, unfortunately. But it, kind of started to spike after COVID.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
You know, and
Well, sorry. I was just going to tag on to what you were saying about Abel and just note that the author of Hebrews seems to think that the blood of Abel is crying out from the ground throughout the entirety of the Hebrew Bible, all the way up to Jesus, where he says, like, you know, that Jesus's blood speaks a better word than the blood of Abel. So, yeah, there is that sense that Abel is still there demanding justice, not just for his death, but for all the innocent martyrs.
Well, and then you get to Revelation, right? Where right beneath the throne are the souls of the martyrs, and they're crying out for justice, right? The bloodshed of the innocent, once again, crying out for justice. I never thought of that way. It's interesting. Wow.
Yep.
So before we get too far in past it, what I really want to be able to do is honor the cosmic twin over here for this gypsy magic. Thank you, bro, for your super chat. We appreciate your support. You're a wonderful human being and a blessing to me personally, but thank you for being a blessing to the channel and to the chat. You're a wonderful person. So anyway, he asks, can you speak on baptism as voluntary crossing the river Styx, the Reed Sea, Davy Jones' locker, flood/chaos waters of death, as a stepping in, overcoming the fear of the shadow we call death? ?
I feel like, Spencer, you're ready to go on this one. I know you've got a couple of podcast episodes that touch on these themes.
Yeah. Oh boy. Yeah, I have lots.
Yeah.
I think, well, and also for that matter, that was a big theme of the Good Friday sermon that I preached at my church. Looking at how the fear of death is a central feature to why we sin, or at least what keeps us enslaved to sin. And that is, you know, obviously coming from Hebrews 2:14-15. But I think one of the things that, actually, I come at this from a counselor's standpoint. One of the things I tell my clients all the time is that a fear of the avoidance of a feared stimuli only increases the fear of the stimuli. So, for example, like when I was a school counselor,
that's a really great way of putting that. Wow, thank you for that.
Yeah, sure. So, like when I was a school counselor, I would work with kids who were really nervous about going to school. They were dealing with social anxiety. And so the longer they would stay out of that school context, the more the anxiety would increase. The more they would be afraid of going in, because then everyone's going to be looking at me because I've been gone for so long, and they're going to ask a bunch of questions. Where were you at? Et cetera, et cetera. Same thing with like heights, flying, spiders, everything that we're afraid of. If we avoid it, it just makes the fear bigger. And another way I've kind of described this to people is like, if this thing feels like a dragon, if you treat it like a dragon, it will act like a dragon.
Oh yeah.
But if it feels like a dragon and you treat it like a caterpillar or a snake or whatever, it will act like that. And so one of the things that can be really helpful in this, like, baptism is voluntarily stepping into that death space, is really saying, actually, I've got this fear of death just by being aware of my own mortality. If I actually embrace it by killing certain things that are connected to that fear of death voluntarily, then the fear of, I don't really fear death as much, because I am embracing the death of the things that I am attached to. And because it's going to happen anyway, regardless of what, whether I want it to or not. And if I just avoid that fear and go, oh my gosh, I have to get more, then it's only going to increase the fear, increase the sinning, increase the slavery, feedback loop. But if I just step into that death and say, actually, I'm going to go ahead and accept it and embrace it and do it with my forerunner, Jesus, at my side, then we actually, the experience of death becomes an experience of life.
And it's very interesting that you put it that way, because for the believer, we actually experience death and resurrection on a spiritual level here and now.
Yep.
Right? We experience the death of our sinful carnal nature, right? And appetites and whatnot. And we experience a resurrection of renewed appetites, hearts, minds that are now geared toward pleasing God, as opposed to pleasing our flesh, which leads to death, right? And so, very interesting to consider, if the believer truly participates in that, how you actually end up facing death.
Yeah.
Yep.
Right? That's what you end up doing. If you truly embody it, you have to face death. You have to die.
Yep. Yeah, that's basically exactly why Jesus says, take up your cross, like take up your death and follow me, you know. That we're following him through death daily on our walk of discipleship. And the beginning of that is our baptism, where we're being cleansed, like, because, you know, cleansing is all about like cleaning off this death stuff in Leviticus, you know, off of all the things. And so we're being cleansed in the water and attached to Jesus's death, so that we can be attached to his resurrection. So we no longer fear death, and we just are living in life. So then we lose those like worldly attachments that were kind of causing us or leading us to sin in the first place. Yeah.
Interesting.
I like that. I really
There's
like that.
a really good patristic quote I want to find. Keep going. I'll come back to it.
Troy's follow-up question there. So what you're saying is that baptism isn't a mere symbol. Winky face.
I hate the word mirror
Troy,
when it pops in there.
Now, Troy.
Yeah.
You stop that, Troy.
And why do people use mirror just like that? Like, it's just
because
symbol,
reductionism is a tasty poison. That's why.
It is. Tastes like Kool-Aid.
It's
oh no!
It's like Kool-Aid. That's one of those magic spells, what I like to call them. Like these little slogans or little phrases that just make you stop thinking at that moment. You're like, oh yeah, it's just a symbol. And so you hear the word just, and you just like immediately stop thinking about the significance there. Yeah. But the issue after Eden in the Hebrew Bible is, how do we get access back to this life stuff? And generally speaking, in the way that it's framing the Christian story, is that the Garden of Eden lay back in the past and is inaccessible now in the midst of the death space. But in fact, what God is constantly doing is invading the death space with his life. And there are very tangible ways to access the divine life again. And so the primary ways, by giving them the tabernacle so they can partake of the divine food, that it participates in the immortality of God and the fire of God. So something that people really miss about Leviticus is that the whole point of Leviticus is how to like sustain the Sinai fire, because God comes down off of Mount Sinai and lights the fire himself. That's his fire. That's his divine life. And so then when you cook the food on the Sinai fire, you're partaking of divine life. Like that's you getting the food that is going to help you like get this immortal life, so you can participate in God's life. And so that is kind of the question. That's what baptism is doing. It's initiating you into the divine life. It's rebirthing you into the divine life. And then we have this other rite that is giving us the sustaining food of divine life. Because that's what we have to do as just people. We come in to the world. We're born into the world, and we're not just born and we keep living without any help.
Hey, Courtney, relax. Communion is just crackers and wine. Okay?
It's just as simple too. It's just
crackers and grape juice. Just relax, guys.
Just relax.
Okay, I found it.
I'm gonna always keep these right here. Here it is. Here it is, you guys.
Right.
For the sinner on the go.
Yeah. So this is Gregory of Nyssa from his treatise on baptism, on the baptism of Christ. This is going to be a semi-lengthy quote, but it's so good. It's worth quoting in full. Now, if we have been conformed to his death, sin henceforth in us is surely a corpse pierced through by the javelin of baptism. And then he says, flee therefore from us, ill-omened one, meaning Satan. It is a corpse you seek to despoil, meaning our old self. One long ago joined to you, one who long since lost his senses for pleasures. A corpse is not enamored of bodies. A corpse is not captivated by wealth. A corpse slanders not. A corpse lies not, snatches not at what is not its own, reviles not those who encounter it. My way of living is regulated for another life. I have learned to despise the things that are in the world, to pass by the things of earth, to hasten to the things of heaven.
Wow.
I just love that idea of like Gregory saying, like, look, Satan, do what you want. Because like this thing's a corpse. Baptism killed this. And there's something else here that you have no claim over. Because daily that corpse is being there's that corruption and disillusion idea. Daily that corpse is being further and further pulled apart so that from the things of this world, so that like whatever you're going to get your hands on is dust, quite literally dust.
It's fragmented. It's already been broken apart. And that's something that Maximus the Confessor also gets at. He says that, we move from non-being into being. And that movement from non-being into being, again, we don't remain in stasis. Like after we move into being, we are moving along a trajectory. And we're either moving along the trajectory of well-being, meaning that we're growing and being sustained in life, or growing on a trajectory of ill-being, meaning that we're moving towards death. And like that's like for everyone. And you see that even in little infants. You can tell, like, are you gaining weight? You weigh a little infant, every day, just so you can see if they're gaining weight, if they're moving towards that well-being. If not, they're moving towards ill-being. We need to figure out what's going on with them. Right. And so that's just a part of also, again, how that Hebrew Bible framework works in spatial categories to consider life and death in your relationship towards God. But it's very physically oriented towards the temple or towards the promised land. It's not just like a spiritual metaphor. And that word symbol, like going to what Spencer was saying, is like being fragmented. So symbol in Greek means to bring two things together.
Yeah.
Join two things together. And diabolos. So symbolos is to bring two things together. Diabolos is to break things apart. And that is why that is the language for the devil in Greek.
Yep.
Diabolos.
Separator.
To break
separator.
Separate things.
Right. See, it's like we're operating under a unifying guiding principle at this moment because we're having very similar thoughts to one another.
Yeah. So I don't even know what justice symbol would mean. If it's like this, it's like I hope to be this. Like, if it's like just a spiritual resurrection, I don't want that. I want a body spirit resurrection.
Right.
I feel like the closest thing to a mere symbol that I've come to have like any analogy for is like the difference. And this will be relevant to you, Courtney, because you would understand this. In Hebrew, a single letter can have meaning. In English, it cannot, unless it's a particularized letter, right? And it has to be in association with something that you assign to it. It doesn't simply have meaning out of context on its own, right? The letter E doesn't have a meaning. It has a sound. And that's all. That's all it has. It has nothing else. It's just a marking and a sound. There's no concrete.
Needs to be joined together with other letters.
Right. It's too disjointed on its own because it's merely phonetic. It's not meaningful yet. But okay, so we have actually two things that were said in the chat that remind me of something that we haven't talked about yet that I think is just as relevant and something that perhaps on the more relational and spiritual side is, I think, a little bit more difficult to deal with for the Christian, let's say, is Richard said, I think when I die, I'd like to leave my son a nice inheritance, a lake house, and a couple other. So what he lists is things that he'd like to leave to his children as a provision. And the sentiment is, when I die, I'd like to leave something in that gap. That's beautiful. And I agree with it. But it arises within ourselves two things. Number one, that death is a reality and it leaves absence. And that those who are without us will likely grieve us and feel our absence. And it's not like this is the hard thing about something. the absence of something has a quality of its own, because it usually, like, if you take something away, something else can go in its place, but persons aren't really like that, you know. And so we know and we understand the loss and things like that. So we want to leave an inheritance, and we want to leave something for those who are left in our absence, right? Especially if we know that our death is inevitable, right? We understand that. And then if we see its immediacy approaching, let's say in old age or in sickness or whatever else, right? If we know that that's occurring, like I have life insurance for my wife and my kids. I got that when I was very young because God gave me the foresight to be prudent and paranoid. And I decided, because I knew the nature of my job being rather dangerous and working with electricity, right? Because I was an electrician, I knew that I had a job that could be directly and like deadly harmful to me. And so I wanted to be prudent about that. And so I made a provision for those, but it's not like an insurance policy for X amount of money is going to fill the gap of my absence. And so something still has to be dealt with, right? Like the idea of inheritance is beautiful because it shows prudence and wisdom on the part of the person who is dying, right? But then there's also the experience of those who are left behind. So it's grief, right? Grief is a reality. You know, the scripture deals heavily with grief. It's not shy about this. Right. It's ready to look that in the face also. And so that's something that's, relevant and akin to the same problem of the fear of death, is that we don't fear just our own death. We fear the death of those who we love, right? And I have an intuition in my heart that there's two sides to that problem, is that we are ordinate to fear the loss. We are inordinate to fear the death, right? Death should not be the thing that the fear is attached to. But there is genuine merit. I believe there is genuine merit in recognizing that the loss is real, the absence is real, the experience of that absence is not without its substance. And so to recognize that that's something that occurs also, and that we shouldn't shy away from that, right? Well, go ahead.
I was just going to say, Josh, I think that's also reflective of the fact that we were never created to experience this type of separation, right? Even though it's become a part of our experience and our existence now, even in that, it still bothers us to be separated from each other in that type of way, where one of us is separated from life in and of itself. It still bothers us, even if we don't necessarily direct it to, God and being, and to be separated from life is to be separated from God and all that. We don't always, make all of those connections, but it still is reflective of the fact that to be, for our souls to be separate from our body and for us as human beings to be separated from each other is bad. And it was never intended to be a part of our existence. And so when it does happen, I think the grief is tied to that like we are experiencing something that is reflective of the current state that we're in.
Yeah,
I was thinking the same thing, Jaylen. It's like we are really being brought into like one mind think.
Yeah. you see what I mean, right? Like, yeah, I love doing this. I just sometimes I can really feel the privilege of doing what we do here with what we're doing now. It's just really something.
Yeah, it's kind of like I had kind of an incident in where I like potentially could have lost a leg, and it was pretty traumatic. And that's kind of what the death of a loved one feels like to me.
Yeah.
Would I have been able to like learn how to walk again with some kind of help or with some kind of ambulatory aid or something like that? Like, yes, I would have been able to figure it out. I would have had God who was with me, who has strengthened me during that time to help me suffer well and to recover well and all these kinds of things. But having to figure out how to walk again without that limb and or without that person, because like they're part of our body, like that's why it's like the body of Christ. Like it's like they're a part of us. We were uniquely intertwined with the people that we love. So it's like you can figure out how to live again, but you were created to be in such physical union with them that you consider them as your own person.
Yeah.
And so, and the way that you learn how to walk after that is going to be different than how you walked before. You'll never be the same.
Right.
You know.
There's
And
also something real. Oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say, brace yourself because a Nathan Jacobs podcast reference is coming. So one of the he's been doing a series, a finally ending, but for a while they're never ending series about the problem of evil. And one of the things he talks about in there is how whenever we feel that like the loss and the injustice and that's so horrible and that's awful that we feel when some horrific death, loss, grief thing happens, is actually revealing to us the goodness of God, because it's showing us like how good it is, that thing is that is gone. So for example, like, I mean, God forbid, Lord have mercy, if something were to happen to my daughter, like I would be devastated. But the reason why I would be devastated is because of the love that I have for her, because of how beautiful and how much potential and how much goodness there is, it was, and would be in her life up to this point, and also in, whatever life she may have had that got cut short. And so it's and this is actually one of the best descriptions I've heard of this was from the WandaVision TV series, and this is a slight quasi spoiler, so I will just throw that out there in case anyone doesn't want to listen. But at one point, Vision, who is one of the characters, is talking to Wanda, his girlfriend, more or less, and she has lost her brother. Her brother has died, and it was her twin brother. And she was describing it very much like you were saying, Courtney, of like, I have to learn how to walk without a limb now. And he was consoling her, and he said, "What is grief but love persevering?" And I just think that is so powerful. And that's something that I talk with my clients who have lost people in their life about all the time, is that grief, I mean, honestly, we don't want to shut off grief. We definitely, I mean, not just like because it causes unhealth in us, but part of the reason why it does so is because it is a reflection and expression of our love for that person, for that individual. So it's like you can't lose the grief without also losing the love. They are two sides to the same coin. And so you have to, in many ways, kind of embrace the grief, embrace that experience of death, because that's the only way in which that love can continue to be expressed in the world. So,
something interesting. I've heard people who've gone through the tragedy of divorce. I've heard them talk about divorce in that way, where it's like it's almost like you're grieving death, right? And I've heard people say like, I feel like I just died. It's like, what do you mean you feel like you just died? But when you think about it, you can kind of take a step back and really contemplate that you kind of did. And what died was the life that you thought you were going to live for the rest of your life with this person, right? But it was not till death do you part, right? Like death did not do you part in this divorce, right? The person's still alive, and yet, but your life with this person has just died. Yeah, and so there's a grieving that a mourning that kind of takes place, but it's weird, in a way. When I heard someone say that before, like, I feel like I just died. It's like, what does that mean? You feel like you just died? Like, no, you kind of did. It's kind of what divorce is.
Because your heart got ripped out of your body.
Right.
Yeah.
And in many ways, like an inability to grieve properly is an inability to repent.
Yeah,
very much.
That's true.
So whether it's something big like divorce or something like that, but if you're not able to see like the outflowing consequences from your sin and see how they lead to death and see how they lead to alienation and these kinds of things, then you'll never like actually repent if it doesn't grieve you or cut you to the heart, is like the Bible likes to say.
Sure.
Yeah.
Prick your kidneys.
Prick your kidneys. Yeah.
Oh, jeez.
Yeah,
So the thing
sounds
that
an awful
stands
lot
out to-
like. Good. Oh,
Say what?
sorry. I was just gonna say it sounds an awful lot like Paul in 2 Corinthians 7:10. Godly sorrow brings repentance that leads to salvation without regret, but worldly sorrow brings death. Like there's that example of, if you can't grieve well, if you can't grieve your own sins well, then it's impossible to repent, because the mere idea of facing that and contemplating the possibility that you have, that something that, a thing you thought about yourself has died, and marriage has died because of those sins, someone else's hopes and dreams for the future has died because of those sins. If you can't be sorrowful for that in a godly way, if you can't face that and really feel that loss, then it just leads to death. But there's a godly sorrow, a godly grief that leads to repentance and life.
I like that. Because it is the case that, let's say, every sin is its own kind of death. And so on, like the most high resolution scale possible, every sin should have its lament. Every sin should have its grief, its moment, right? Which is to say, the thing is a death, and then we also have to let it die, right? And so there's the two things, which is accepting that something has died when I sin, and then also accepting that I need to let the sin die, because there's two halves of the desire that's here, right? My desire not to sin, and then my obvious desire to sin, because I don't sin without having the desire. It's not like sin is just an accident all the time. You know what I mean? So like understanding that sometimes when you sin, it's not simply because you omitted something, it's because you forwardly did something that was wicked, right? And recognizing that the thing that you've done has brought some level of disarray and disorder, some level of raw to creation. And it's not just you that suffers that evil. It's creation also that suffers that evil, right? And so something happens. Something genuinely happens. And that's why, like, our decision making, our actions, our thinking, it matters. We matter. We have some crazy, terrifying privilege to make reality what it is to some degree, and so we should be able to look sin in the face and mourn it, right? We should be able to allow that to pass and all that. To liken that unto the death of someone that you love, and like Jaylen said, the loss, like it's not just divorce, but like the death of a spouse or something, right? Where you have the passing away of something that you had developed an expectation for in the future, right? And so it's like when you sin, it's the way I'm thinking about it right now is like when I sin, I'm betraying the future self that I would have been had I not. That future self in that stead, for all intents and purposes, is like the stranger I should be blessing, but instead I'm betraying him, right? And so I'm severing myself from the life that ought to have been by bringing something else to be, right? Something like that. And when I do that, I'm doing a disservice to myself, but I'm also harming reality. So then when someone else dies and we feel the harm that comes of it, it's like a more immediate right now sensation of what it is that's happening on the individual level when we sin. So that's why those things have their remarkable overlap. But what's even more terrifying to me, I think, is what Spencer brought up when he said, heaven forbid and Lord have mercy that something happened to my children, my wife, right, to my sister, to my mother, to my dad, to my pastor, to my friends, to my coworker, right? People that I genuinely love and care about, right? And a direct proportional relation between the quality and quantity of love lavished to some person is going to be directly in relation to how much grief that is experienced because of a loss. I do believe that. I think that's true. because those things are correlates and not just like, you know, when you're young and you're in the midst of a fresh and alive romance, you can feel the distance between you and the beloved. And that absence makes your heart so fond, and reuniting makes your heart so satisfied and so happy. Right? So we all kind of get this. But then on the opposite end of it, all of that beauty that's building up for your longing and desire and the satisfaction of embrace, the loss is going to be at least proportionate, if not bigger sometimes, you know? And so I've lost quite a lot of family, you know, and I can say that I've been blessed to know that virtually every person in my life that has passed away has been a believer that I'm confident was serving the Lord well and that he has a genuine place for. And it gives me a comfort because I have that moment where right now I know that my heart is fond because of their absence, but reunifying will be a blessing and a satisfaction that is unmatched, right? Because I know that the beloved is not estranged forever. That's why divorce is what it is, by the way. Like you just said a moment ago, Jaylen, is that you have a full estrangement from beloved. There is no, it's like the resurrection is gone now. If that was just stolen, you know what I mean? I think that's why people feel like it's death. I genuinely feel like that. It makes sense, right? Like I've never been divorced, thank the Lord, but I've come close. And it was very much like a near-death experience, even so, right? Like very much. And so I think that my fear genuinely of death at this point in my life is mostly attached to my wife and my children, right? And this in my heart, like I can feel my face. I want to cry because I'm thinking about the martyrs and how some of these people had their family taken from them.
Yeah.
What an efficient threat that is, right?
Yeah.
This is something that draws me back to the novel by C.S. Lewis, Till We Have Faces, where the main character leverages the love the other person has for them against them to get them to do what they want. It's a really masterful manipulation. But they used love to destroy unity. It was like, that is one of the deepest sins. I think that is one of the worst kinds of betrayal, is to use love to score disunity.
Well, I mean, I know that in Proverbs, it's one of the things that God hates is hands that shed innocent blood, and one who sows discord among the brethren, right? One who sows division amongst unity, right? I can certainly see that.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm just kind of in my heart, I recognize, and I don't want to gloss over the fact that I presently have fear left in me of this very present enemy that we know is, you know, and this is the thing. Knowing is a very dense thing. There's not just one form of how you know something. You can know something in your head. There you go. Shout out to Dr. Vervaeke. You can know something with your head and miss it by 18 inches and it destroy you because you don't know it here. You know it, you know the words, you can say it, but it doesn't meet the person. It doesn't become part of who and what you are.
You know, Josh, it's like you know, Jordan Peterson, right? You know, when I first started listening to him and people would ask him, does God exist? And Jordan Peterson would say, I behave like God exists.
Right.
And you listen
I'm terrified that he might. That's the addendum.
Yeah, that's it right there, right? But it was like, what do you mean you behave like God exists? And I began to like really ponder that, because it's not a typical Christianese answer, right?
Right.
No, the evangelicals are flipping tables when he said that. And it's like, it's like, why? It's like, what does that mean? I behave like God exists. And then I began to really think about it. And I'm like, wait a second. Don't I behave like God exists?
Mm-hmm.
Like, yeah, I do. Like to participate in relationship with God is to behave as though God exists, right? And so, you know, that whole knowing thing and is like, okay, to say, yeah, I believe there is a God that exists. Okay, cool. Like you see how empty that sounds? Like it's like that's just, there's got to be more here. Like what are you doing with that? What are you doing with that info? And it just made me think about that when you were saying that to miss it by 18 inches is, you know, I don't think God is at all interested in just us having an intellectual assent to his existence and his personhood. It's like, no, that's not the point whatsoever.
Yeah.
Yeah, and like he
Yeah.
would say that because he's like, I think that what people say, I don't know if when people say I believe in God that they know what they're saying, right? Like he's like,
Yes.
they don't know what
Yes.
they're saying. So he was like, I behave as if God exists.
Yeah.
Well, it makes me think of Jesus in John 17:3, where he says, this is eternal life, Zoe Ionios, that they know you and and the Son whom you have sent. And that sense of knowing there is yada in Hebrew, which is the same word that like Adam knew his wife Eve. It's this very intimate
Yeah.
hello. It's very intimate, participatory,
Yes.
one flesh entwined reality. And so to say, okay, I know God, and that means I have life. Not if you don't know him in that sense, in the biblical sense.
Yeah. It's almost like to say like we know each other on this stream, right? Our spouses know to say my wife to say she knows Jaylen means something totally different to you.
Yep.
Right.
Yep.
And it's completely derived from the intimacy and participation of the relationship that we have, right?
Yeah.
And so for her, even like when you say the name, like if you say the name Jaylen to her, it means something totally different than what it would mean to you three here, or someone walking down the street, right? And so it's kind of the same thing like with Jesus. When you say the name Jesus to certain people, depending on the knowing, right?
Yep.
That name will mean something totally different versus if you said to someone who just has an intellectual assent, they'll say, "Oh yeah, I've heard of Jesus. I use that name as a curse word," right? As opposed to someone knowing Jesus as, you know, the second member of the Godhead and God incarnate and all of these things. Two totally different knowings.
Yep. I believe in my wife. Okay. Does that mean that I believe she was born at a certain year that I will not name for fear of my own death? Does that mean that I know I believe she lived in Wheaton, Illinois growing up? Does that mean that I know she is, you know, a certain height, a certain weight, a certain, you know, all these facts? No, it means that I live with her. I have entwined my life with her, and I have chosen to entwine our finances and trust her with that. And I have chosen to trust her with everything that I am and think and all those things. That's what it means to know God. And that's what life actually looks like. And to not know God is death in that sense.
Right. So it's not just intimacy, it's also creative, fruitful union, right?
Yeah.
Where it's something that comes from it. That's what you are all just implying. That facts are not enough to encompass truth. Truth is what we have and what we can do and what we can live out. Facts are just what's around. It's just proximity. But like this is wonderful. Troy just said about in the vicinity, but without contact. So it's knowing about versus knowing, right? Knowing, I can know about my favorite celebrity without ever having met them. And I can almost, in a weird, strange, obsessive, stalkerish sort of way, convince my heart that I know them in that sense because of what I know about them. Because the picture I have in my mind is formidable enough to fill that gap. But that's pretty much the definition of idolatry, is to have an image in your mind to replace that reality. And so knowing your wife is beautiful. Knowing only the image you have in your mind of your wife and ignoring the actual woman that you live with is bad.
Mhm.
It's bad.
And that's called disappointment.
Right.
Mhm.
Not that men aren't going to do this to some degree, because we do idealize our women because
Sure.
it helps us to honor them and everything else. But if you have Wendy in front of you and you think that she's Tinkerbell, you're going to do it wrong. You're going to do it wrong. Specifically, yes, the specific contact that produces new life, creative union. That's what I think is beautiful about the knowing of a man and a woman in marriage, is that like you get to experience something of what happened in Genesis, right? Because something you're bringing together two things, which is something that God loves to do, right? And that those things that come together bring about something else. What I was interested in is in Genesis 1, right? It seems rather conspicuous that when the spirit that's hovering over the waters is met with the voice that says let there be, the spirit and the speaking, when they come together in God's power, creation happens.
The breath and the word.
The breath in the word, or the breath in the body, and now you have a living soul, right? And these things, it's beautiful, right? And then God pulls from Adam, from his side, he pulls Eve. It's beautiful. And then when you reunite them, something else gets pulled, but not from Adam, but from
It's
Eve.
a mere
this
symbol.
time.
It's just a symbolic one flesh union.
Relax, Josh. Relax, dude.
All those babies that you have, all those children that you have, they're just symbols. You know, they're
Just
fake.
symbols.
That's all they are.
They're
Mere
just arrows in a quiver.
mere gestures. That's all they are.
Yep.
Oh
my
man.
goodness.
So I'm curious, because we're approaching the hour and a half mark. I want to honor your guys' time, because I feel like this has been a very fruitful discussion already.
Yeah.
But I'm curious if there's anything that you guys have in the back of your mind that you'd like to bring out for what it is that we're talking about right now, or if you feel satisfied with where we are.
I was thinking a little bit about how I know you titled the video like the shadow of death. Makes me think of Psalm 23. And I was thinking of, of course, that line there is, even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. And, and immediately before that, it was talking about him restoring our soul and leading us in the path of righteousness. So
Still waters. You know, the
yes,
waters
exactly.
of life. Yeah.
Right. Yes, exactly. So
My shepherd.
Yeah. Courtney is wearing the. She understood the assignment.
Is it made of wool? It's made of wool, right?
I don't know. I have no clue. I mean, it's very nice knit. It might not. It might be cotton.
But the point there being that C.S. Lewis called this world the Shadowlands, and that really is a really good description of what it's like to be in a world that is full of corruption, decay, futility, evil, fallenness, all those things, and to be in a body of flesh that the Greek word sarx there is pretty much means like death principle, basically. To be in all those things, living in that kind of world is like walking through the valley of the shadow of death. And it really is very, very important to make sure that we do that with the shepherd beside us, with him there giving us nourishment for our souls, restoring our souls, giving us living water, leading us and saying, go this way, this path is safe, this path is not. And that's how we fear no evil, and that's how we don't fear death, because we know that our shepherd is leading us through that valley. And then actually the very next psalm is the psalm of ascension, where it's saying, where Jesus, or at least in this case, it's more of a messianic psalm, where it starts off by saying, who can ascend to the mountain of the Lord? Well, the one who has clean hands and a pure heart. And then you hear, the one who has clean hands and a pure heart saying, lift up your heads, O gates, and be lifted up your ancient doors, that the King of glory may come in. So that's what it looks like for us to kind of walk through the valley of the shadow of death, is to have Jesus right beside us the whole time, and then go through that experience of death that transforms Hades from a tomb into a womb, so that we can then be birthed into new life and ascend with him. We die with him so we can rise with him, so we can ascend with him.
Amen.
I
Amen.
can't think of a more beautiful way to end this episode, Josh.
Well, that was fantastic.
I
Yeah,
have nothing to
seriously.
say.
Wow. Yeah. Do you have any closing thoughts, Courtney?
Well, it was like Spencer was stealing my notes that I was clearly channeling through my sweater. So that's where I was going to.
Sorry,
That's
Courtney.
okay. That's okay.
Like get rid of this thing, I guess.
I know, but yeah, no, that Psalm 23 in the way that it pairs the Messiah going down into death and into the valley of shadow of death, and it says he restores or brings back my soul, my nephesh, that living being and spirited body self. He brings it back, resurrects that, so then I can go back. So he brings back my nephesh, so then I can go back to the house of the Lord forever, because he has prepared a table before me. In the presence of my enemies, in the presence of the dust eater, the one who eats the people of dust. I now walk past them into the house of life, which is God's house. And that's exactly what Jesus does, is he walks us through death into life. And in that ascension psalm, like, who is the King of glory? Lord of hosts, mighty in battle, strong in war. He is the King of glory. So he's the one who, through participation in his life, we get life. That's what Psalm says. Paul says in 1 Corinthians 15, that we participate in his life, so that we can be raised incorruptible. So there's a lot to fear with death, just because there's always an unknown. But I fear the unknown almost every day that I wake up, because it's like, I don't know what's coming. My life is unpredictable all the time. And just like I know your lives are, Jaylen, you were talking about having a hard week. And so in all those ways, we were kind of constantly facing small deaths, so that whenever we close our eyes, we will see the one who gave us our life. So that's the goal. It's hard. We live in a society that flees death at every opportunity, that tries to minimize death, that in every way, shape, and form tries to prevent us from ever seeing anything that looks aging, decayed, or not new. If it starts to look old, we just throw it away. And so we really have to fight to resist that impulse in our culture to kind of minimize death. Because to minimize death, like we were saying earlier, is to minimize repentance.
Yep.
And to minimize love and honor also.
Yep.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So I know that Spencer is on the same train as I am. I have one question from the audience before we pop out here that I think is really beautiful. Is to be known by God equivalent to or related to being unembarrassed before him in the light, or ready for the end? I know that Spencer has something queued up for that, I think. I think he said. But off the top of my head, the first place that my intuition goes when I hear that question is a plain reversion to the problem answered, right? When God says, Adam, where are you? And Adam says, I hid because I heard you, and I was afraid because I am naked. God says, who told you you were naked? And here it is. To be known by God is to be free, to strip off all of the garments of skin we use to buffer ourselves against reality, and just to be naked before him. You don't need a Sunday mask. You don't need a reputation. You don't need a good speaking voice. You don't need a PhD. You don't need a big following. You don't need 5,000 subscribers. You don't need a podcast.
Thank goodness.
You can strip all those things away and be with the Lord and be unembarrassed. You can come boldly before the throne of grace with the union that you have in Christ. You have those things. Amen. That is to be known by God and to know God, to be naked before God, which is why I think it's analogous to understand, like Paul says in Ephesians 5, that the church and the Christ are likened unto man and woman in marriage. It's the most appropriate for me to have my body uncovered before my wife, right? And the same with her. It's not that our bodies shouldn't be clothed because of the fall, right? But as I forget which book it is, but Lewis says the body needs to be ripening underneath for the day when clothes are no longer necessary. Right?
Yeah.
So I believe that also. I believe, yes, it is equivalent and or related to being unembarrassed before him and the like. Go ahead, Spencer.
Well, I would also, apart from the patristic quote, I'm going to bring in 1 Corinthians 8:3. But if anyone loves God, he is known by God. So to be known by God is to love God. And that's exactly why Jesus says in Matthew 7 that many will say to him, Lord, Lord, did we not prophesy in your name? And he says, depart from me, I never knew you. Because what we're doing when we put on that false prophet sense, that false self, is we are creating our own self. God created us one way. He created us to be one thing. And then we are creating ourselves in our own image, in our own way. And at the end of all things, when the judgment comes, God is going to take all that is his and take it back. And whatever's left, whatever we have created for ourselves, I mean, I think God's going to look at that and say, I don't know that. I don't know what that is. I didn't create that. That wasn't my creation. And that's one of the reasons why I think it's really important. I mean, and of course, the way that we are known by God is by loving him, because in loving him, we conform ourselves to him, to the image of his son. So to go back to that idea of judgment there, this is from Gregory of Nazianzus. He says, the judgment will be light to those whose mind or nous is purified. That is God, seen and known, proportionate to their degree of purity, which we call the kingdom of heaven. But to those who suffer from blindness of their ruling faculty, that is their nous, darkness, that is estrangement from God, proportionate to their blindness here. So essentially, he's saying there the same thing that Jesus said in John 3. He said, this is the judgment. I am the light. I come into the world. And everyone who loves the light goes toward the light. Everyone who doesn't love the light runs away from it. For those whose mind, whose nous has been purified and has been illuminated and it has been shaped, it has been conformed in the likeness of Christ. That's Romans 12:2. For them, the light feels delightful, feels like life, it fills them with joy and relief, because they're like, finally, this is what I've been searching for all my life. But for those who haven't, it feels like death. So that's one of the things that I think is probably the answer to that question of being known by God. Is that related to or equivalent to being before him in the light? Yes. And all those things will be stripped away, and we will be whatever God created us to be, not what we created ourselves to be.
In direct response to that, I want to read something Troy left in the comments here, and then we can wrap up. This is from Till We Have Faces by C.S. Lewis. A glib saying, when the time comes to you at which you will be forced to at last utter the speech which has lain at the center of your soul for years, which you have all the time, idiot-like, been saying over and over, you'll not talk about the joy of words. I saw well why the gods do not speak to us openly, nor let us answer. till that word can be dug out of us. Why should they hear the babble that we think we mean? How can they meet us face to face until we have faces? Beautiful. Beautiful. You can't meet God face to face if what you have presented to him is not a face at all. It's a mask. It's a contrivance. It's a fabrication. Until that's cleansed of you, you have no face to present to him. He won't recognize you. He'll say, I never knew you. I did, like Spencer said, I did. That's not what I made. I didn't make that. What is this thing? That's absolutely, that is, yes. Oh, if anybody here has not read that book, highly recommended. Fantastic book.
It's my favorite Lewis book, personally.
Lewis's favorite Lewis book also.
Man, I just finished A Grief Observed. I really enjoyed that.
See, that one I actually just revisited this week also. It's very, very poignant, but it's a gut punch for sure.
I was blown away by the time I was done with it. I was just like, you know what? I gotta go through it again. I gotta go through it again.
That was your first time reading it?
First time, yeah.
For sure. You got to read it again. Yeah.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
I think now people will be like, "Oh, the Space Trilogy is his best," but I still like Till We Have Faces.
I have a bias to That Hideous Strength is my favorite book ever, like ever. And
I mean, I love the Space Trilogy. I'm not saying I don't like the Space Trilogy,
but I definitely love Till We Have Faces. Like, I've been convinced that that's one of the deepest stories I've ever heard in my life. It's amazing.
Yep. The Great Divorce. That's me.
It's a good one.
Yeah.
Too.
Oh wow. Listen to the Grief Observed audiobook, and listening to it dramatized as a mistake, I still hurt. Wow. Holy moly.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, that sounds brutal.
Yeah, I listened to it on Audible as well. I gotta go back. Yeah, I couldn't even process all of it.
Yeah, C.S. Lewis requires ruminating. It's a practice of a good reader to repeat. But oh man, bless the Lord. This has been wonderful. Like I'm gonna have to go back and like seriously harvest the heck out of this episode, because there was some nuggets in there. Thank you again to Deborah for asking the question that inspired this episode and got us to do this. This was fantastic, and I am very thankful for you. And thank you for anybody else who's been listening this entire time. If you've made it to this point, if you haven't already, please like the video. If you haven't yet, subscribe to Faith Unaltered. We have lots of content on here. If you like what I've been doing, you can find more of me and Jaylen on the Cosmic Corner playlist on the homepage for Faith Unaltered. If you like Courtney, you can find her also on Faith Unaltered playlist for Hebrew Bible Breakdown, but also on Kairos Classroom. And for Spencer, Trauma Informed Church Kid is his channel. Fantastic stuff. Fantastic stuff on there. If you like what Spencer's offering and you'd like to go ahead.
So I was like, speaking of that, Spencer, I can't get enough of that episode you did about the fall. About the
okay.
Yeah, it's an old one. I can't get enough.
Good. Woohoo! Thank you.
Fantastic, dude. I enjoyed that episode. Fantastic.
Glory to God for all things.
Absolutely. Yeah, for sure. It's I feel like Spencer is one of the few people that I have never heard him say anything that I'm like, yeah, I don't know about that, bro. I think you're just talking out your neck. Right? No. Like everybody shoots from the hip sometimes, but I have a feeling that that Spencer has a sight on his hip, and it's just like it's meant to be there. I really appreciate everything that you've ever added to Cosmic Corner. You're an invaluable person. So I really appreciate that. But yeah, like I want everybody to be able to really take what we've said in this episode and integrate it somehow. So if you've gotten to this point in the episode, please leave a comment. If we're live still right now, not yet, but when the video's over, please leave a comment underneath as kind of a time testament. Make this like a time capsule for yourself, where I want to be able to have people come back to this and say, I learned something about myself and about death that I'm going to leave here and take life with me. Give yourself a life checkpoint here. Use the comment section as a diary for a second. You can be as explicit as you like, but just leave us something here that you recognize. This is something I could leave behind and let die. This is something that I can honor its life and move forward. We want to hear from the audience about those things. Spencer is Treebeard. Nothing worth saying unless it takes a long time.
Yes.
Oh, that's funny. Oh, that's funny. Spencer is the sniper, no shooting from the hip. That would be an awkward hold.
Yeah.
Right?
Oh man, that's good. That's fantastic. Oh man. That being said, Jaylen, do you have anything you want to add before we cut out here, bud?
No, I don't have anything to say. Great episode. Very full from this one. Really enjoyed it. Yeah, Christians, there's no reason to be scared of death anymore. You're gonna do it anyway. Especially if you claim the name of Christ, you're gonna do it anyway.
You're gonna do it.
You're gonna do it before you do it.
Like, do it well.
You're gonna do it, and if you participate, you'll do it well.
Yep. Die before you die, so when you die, you won't die.
Mm-hmm.
There it is. Oh man, this was wonderful. And to answer your question earlier, Troy, I am pleased. This was fantastic. I can't wait to go back and re-listen to this and just be blessed all over again. But everybody who's listening, thank you so much for your time and attention. We honor you and thank you for sticking with us to the end. Again, like and subscribe and all that good stuff. But in the name of the Lord Jesus Christ, good night. God bless. Stay like Christ.